This is a presentation for adopting Fortune 500 scaling tactics from day one. The goal of this presentation is to show you some techniques and some things to both from the infrastructure side and from the application side to think of before you start writing an application so that you can be successful as you get more traffic and as you scale. My name is Hector Iribarne. I've been with Drupal since 2007. Started back in Drupal 5. I'm also the co-organizer of Broward Drupal in South Florida. Jay Epstein and I, and David here is a member as well. And my contribution to Drupal was back, like 8 years ago in Drupal 7. I built some sandbox modules to export content types out of Drupal into individual CSV files, and then with the content out module and the content in, you can then import back into Drupal with that same CSV. You just have to use some other modules to migrate over the content types and the taxonomy. This was after the first Drupal get-in, so that's because when I saw that Drupal get-in happened, people were like had corrupt databases and things. So I figured this was a good solution. If you just want to export all your data out, you can have it in CSV files and then import them back in. So that's kind of what I did in the past. So today I kind of try to summarize the presentation in 2 slides, so you kind of have an idea what I'm going to be talking about. So the first slide, it's a little scary, but give me some time to talk about it. Basically, on the left is kind of like the infrastructure piece, which is what's being shown here. And then I'm also going to be talking about applications. So the first part of the presentation, we'll be talking about infrastructure all the way from your WAF CDN like Cloudflare down to whatever hardware you're going to have behind it. This is kind of like a customer that has over 1,000 domains. This is one example of how they built out their hardware. I'm not going to talk about it in detail yet because I'm going to have a separate slide for it in the future. But the idea is I'm going to spend part of the presentation talking about how to start your very first, not even using shared hosting. I'm starting you off with basically a VPS, how to set that up, how to scale that up, and your options for doing different things. And if you want, you can interrupt me and ask me questions along the way if you feel like something doesn't make sense or you want me to clarify something. The second thing is, if you scale things right, you should be able to save money, because there's a lot of ways that people, I'm going to get into it more, but if you cache things a lot and you use the right methods, you can actually spend money more efficiently. And that's kind of where I'm going to get into. So I'm not just talking about how to build things the right way, but also how to save your money when you actually do get traffic. So you don't want to be spending a lot of money early on. So this is part of the presentation it's not just about saving money, it's also about getting better SEO, because things are faster, and so that's something that I'm going to be talking about. So I'm going to kind of divide the presentation up into 3 sections. The first section, which is a few slides, I'm going to talk about how to get started with your very first site and kind of the things that you would be doing as your traffic grows, your different options for how to scale up your infrastructure. Most of the presentation is going to be on application efficiency. So I'm going to talk about how to build sites, what modules to use, what modules to avoid, and a lot of other things, including what products to use and how you can now use a lot of free products that don't cost anything that will help you scale and make your site more efficient. And at the very end, I'm going to have a few customer examples of customers that have done things that went wrong for them and how it was corrected, so you can get an idea of how different customers have gone through scenarios where their application didn't scale efficiently, so they had downtime, for example. Okay, the first part of the presentation is on scaling infrastructure. Oops. Okay, so day one, I call day one like the first time you're gonna, if you're gonna build a site, what am I gonna have as production hardware? I always recommend getting a free Cloudflare account. Cloudflare is really great. WAF CDN. WAF stands for Web Application Firewall. CDN is the content delivery system that makes. Usually the best. Some people buy the WAF and CDN from different providers, but you really want to use one provider. And the best one I found is Cloudflare because a free account gives you a lot of flexibility. So basically, you have your CDN. Then you have the static IP address of where your VPS would be. So if you went on Linode or DigitalOcean, you would have a static IP address, and then you would point your WAF to the static IP address, and then you would start out with one plan, which is usually all your hardware on one box. And then you have your prod, your test, and your dev environment on one box. You have Apache running for your web servers. You have your database, so everything's on one box. And right here you can see production stage and development are all in the same box. So this is the cheapest way to get started. And say that you start getting traffic and you need more hardware, you would just vertically scale this. So you'd go from like an 8 gig plan to 16 gig. So theoretically you would scale vertically. So it'd be the same box, but it would have more memory, more CPU. Now, if that gets to a point where you want to go to the next level, the next thing I would recommend is keeping your current hardware the way it is, but adding a load balancer between your CDN and your web and database stack. Because this is your balancer, you can put your static caching on it. So there's a lot of tools because don't forget your CDN is static caching, which means basically static caching is like the CDN has like a bucket of URLs, and if the user requests a URL and it's in that static caching, then it will reply it will respond to the request without impacting your hardware. So that would lower the cost, and also it's quicker response time. There's also techniques for caching statically your balancer so it doesn't hit your backend. And there's also ways of setting up your time to live on your caching to hopefully, because everything in your CDN, everything in the balancer is static caching. Anything that comes in here, you're basically bootstrapping Drupal, which means that's going to cost you more money. Even if you cache for a certain amount of time, you'll periodically have to come. And because anytime you hit this, the web servers, database, file system, that's going to cost you more money than, say, if Cloudflare responds to the request or the balancer. So, and then this is a customer that had 1,000 domains. As you can see, this is really complicated. The one thing I wanted to show you is this red line. When I talk about bootstrapping Drupal, it means invoking PHP resources to respond to the request. So normally, everything will come through the CDN. If it's in that cache, it will respond. But if it goes through the CDN, it gets to the balancers, then they will respond. But there's a lot of things that will pass through all that static caching and hit your backend. So the general technique is to try to avoid that whenever possible. So if your site is mostly anonymous, you mostly want it to be responding between your CDN and your load balancers. I would say this is actually a Drupal 7 customer that had Drupal 7 for like 10 years. So they kind of built things the old way, and as they added more sites, they always needed to add more and more hardware. So each of these boxes represents like Web 201, 202. These are actually physical servers in Amazon. And not only did they have that, but in the back end they also had, so you have static caching up here, and then you have memcache, or like you can use Redis to do dynamic caching between web requests and your databases. And they even have separate hardware for their non-prod environment. So this staging server is kind of like one box, and it has the dev and test environments all running here, and then all this, the production box is all this other hardware.
Are you allowed to say who that was?
Huh?
Are you allowed to say who that was?
No. It's a financial services company, I'll tell you that much.
Okay. It looked very similar to a setup that a company I used to work for many years ago.
Do you have any questions about any part of this? Because this is kind of important as far as, just think every request, every URL request that comes to your site will first go through your WAF and CDN. And then the balancer layer, like there's a pair of balancers, so like if one goes down, then the other one's there. And this is kind of, this way, customer had it configured as active passive. So everything's coming through this balancer here, and it's being replicated here, but if this balancer goes down, then automatically, oh well, it had to be manually done. You have this other balancer to take all the requests. As you can see, all the web requests are split across all these webs here. There's 10 web servers. And I forget the size of these, but they were pretty beefy servers themselves. And then these are also the dynamic caching is also separate hardware. And each of these boxes, like for the DB map, they had 2 sets of databases. Because over time they realized one pair of databases wasn't enough, so they ended up having to do a second set of databases. Any questions about this? Okay. Any questions about the hardware? Because I'm going to move on to the application now. Okay.
I have a quick question.
Oh, sure.
But I'm very hesitant because I'm so technical, but we have a client that when we are running a site-wide cache, that's when we have performance issues. Where would that be in the system, and how could we prevent it? Because the caching takes like a week to do. Because of the content.
You probably, I don't know the hardware of your customer, but you probably, when people say caching, usually they mean static caching. Because the balancer, the way it works is, it kind of works the same as Cloudflare,
Okay.
but it's another layer of protection. And so everything, the URL, what happens is a URL comes in, if it's not in the cache of the CDN will say, I don't have this URL, so it's going to pass it to the balancers in this scenario. This balancer is also running static caching, which means it's going to look at, when the request comes in, it says, do I have this URL? If it does, it will respond, and then it would never hit this back end. But, so anything that's not in here will then pass through and hit the web server, and that will invoke PHP processes, including this running, it will hit the PHP processes, which is consuming resources on the web server. So if it takes a long time to cache, it could be that there's a reason why sometimes people, whenever they make a change in their application, they clear the cache. And if you do that, then that cache has to be repopulated. So whatever strategy you're using to cache your site may have to be re-looked at.
So it takes a week to cache?
That's it's a new site, so it's got.
And when you say cache, which cache are you talking about?
I think she's talking about.
This is one.
Wait,
Excited to ask the
new
question.
or a news site?
A news, like articles pulling in from feeds and loading on the site.
Do you know if you have a CDN like Cloudflare?
We have Cloudflare.
You have Cloudflare. So I would start looking at Cloudflare, because Cloudflare will give you statistics on what it's responding to and what it's letting through. So what you do is you look to see what's getting through Cloudflare, and then see why it's not being cached in Cloudflare. There's different reasons why it would not be cached. There are certain types of requests, like post requests, like filling out forms that will always pull through to the webs. I'm going to get into that more, but that's.
I'll let you go.
No. But I want to answer your question as best as I can. So you're going to have to look at your caching in Cloudflare.
Okay.
So whoever's running the Cloudflare will have to actually look to see what, because Cloudflare has graphs where it'll show you what it responds to and what it lets through. So you would look at what gets through and see why that's not being cached in Cloudflare. That's where I would begin. I would begin in Cloudflare.
I also take a look at how if you guys have web cache, like how that's, like what policies you have set up with that.
Yeah.
Do you know who you're hosting with?
I think it's Platform Message, if I remember correctly. And the reason I asked the question is because we have Cloudflare and I know the team is like looking to optimize it. Like and trying different things to make it better. What I was curious about was the balancers and
this would all be
that was something we are doing.
This would all be Platform SH.
Yeah.
All this would be Platform SH. Everything below this line, that's why I have the static IP addresses of, usually it's one. So your Platform SH hardware that you're paying for will have usually one IP, and then behind that, you may or may not have balancers. So if you don't have balancers, then every request that's not being done by, responded to by Cloudflare will be responded to by the webs on Platform SH, which will consume, and that's what's not being cached. So you really have to look at to see what URLs are not being cached. Start with those and then see why they're not being cached. I'll get into more ways of detecting that. Right now I have a few slides where I can show you how to kind of detect that. To see when stuff does get through, how to identify so that you can say, okay, this web server is responding to a request. We don't want it to because it's static. So we want to configure Cloudflare so that it will respond and it will save you from invoking your backend.
Thank you.
Okay, so when I talk about Bootstrap, it's not the theme. It's basically bootstrapping Drupal is anytime a request comes to the web server, it consumes PHP resources on the web server to respond to the request. So, and that's the most expensive thing you can have. So basically, bootstrapping Drupal is when you get past the static cache of CDN like Cloudflare and or the balancer. So anything that gets past these two is going to hit your web, and that's going to bootstrap Drupal. So just wanted to kind of clarify that. And the other thing that I want you to take away from this is that every time you bootstrap Drupal, it's going to cost you more money. It's going to be theoretically slower response time to the request, which means it could impact your SEO as well. So that's something that's really important to distinguish between the things that are being responded to quickly and what invokes things. Sometimes you do have to bootstrap Drupal to get a response, but that's kind of a differentiation that I like to make. So people, when they're designing their application, they want static cache to respond as much as possible because that's going to be the cheapest solution. And also the fastest solution for your users that are requesting that URL and their URLs. This is kind of how I like to look at whenever you're starting a site. Most people will go right into what this site going to do. They don't think about other things. Like what most customers will do is they'll get in a meeting and say, we need to have this, this, and this on the site. And then the dev team that either internally or externally will then work on this. They'll launch the site, and then if there's performance issues, they'll go, why is the site so slow? Well, and then maybe once you get past performance, they'll think, oh, we should also keep the site secure after that. So for me, this is an upside down model. This is not what I recommend. As a customer, you should always be asking, security should always be first, because if your site's not secure, then what do you have? So you have to have techniques to keep your site secure, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that later. The next thing you should also think about is performance. So when you're building your site, if you build a site that's not cached, that's slow, that's built in a way that every request has to be processed by web servers, that's probably not the best approach. Because when you go to launch the site, if the site's slow, you've already built the entire site. You've already So the goal of this presentation is to show you ways to avoid doing that. So start thinking about performance before you even think of how you're going to build it. Or if you get ready to functionality, you should ask, is this going to perform well? Because, I mean, you can launch your site and it could go down if you're not careful. So like I said, the three, always think about security. Performance is really important, especially nowadays, both security. Then you can worry about how you're going to build your site. So for security, it's really important to keep up with Drupal updates for core and contrib. The thing is that every Wednesday, not every Wednesday, but on the Wednesday of every week, the Drupal releases security updates for core and or contrib. A lot of customers don't apply those security patches right away. You should have code governance where you're going to be updating those modules that are part of Drupal every a day or two at the most. Because if you don't, that means your site's vulnerable until you do upgrade the modules. So whatever your code governance is, like doing deployments, you should be able to have a strategy where you can release a hotfix to kind of to keep your site secure and up to date. Also, it's really important to monitor what traffic is getting through to your site, because these days you not only have to worry about bots or bad agents, you now have to worry about AI agents that are scanning your sites. And a lot of times when these scans happen, they bypass all of your static caching and they hit your webs, which is going to cost you money. It could also cost you downtime. A lot of customers go down because they get attacked and their website's overwhelmed and your site goes down. So you want to avoid that. And the best way to avoid that is to monitor, and I'm going to show you some techniques to do that, to see what requests are getting through to the web servers and the databases. So you can actively block them in your, for example, Cloudflare that has, or Acquia or Fastly. There's a lot of different providers of web application firewalls. And this is what I'm saying here. You want to monitor your web server, your logs. So if your web servers are running Apache, which most do, you could use it. There's other solutions like Nginx and other things, but you want to keep an eye on your Apache access logs, so that shows you what's getting through. And then if you want that traffic to happen and it's important for your business to do that, then okay. But if it's a bad actor, you want to block it so that you're not wasting money and potentially risking downtime. Okay. So I'm just going to get back to starting on day one again. One thing about a lot of people that build Drupal is they get right into writing custom code from the very beginning. And you want to get away from that. Obviously, custom code is necessary for a lot of sites. But if you're using Drupal, you should start out with Drupal first, both core and contrib. Drupal has an amazing entity system which lets you build data structures that emulate content types, and you can build that out of your site without writing any custom code. So I recommend that when you're talking about how to build your site, you work with whoever's building the site and have some kind of, ask them for a data model, a structured data model of how all of your content types are going to work and how you're going to add them. Because if you need to modify things, you can do it right in the model before you build anything. It's going to save you time and money. So, and a lot of times people will use entity relationship. Has anyone here used data modeling or any relationship diagrams? A little bit, not much. About half the class. So I think it's a good approach. If you're a customer and you're paying someone to build you the site, you have to know to ask what questions to say, I want you to build it this way, or tell me why you're doing it this way. Because if you write 100% on your dev partner, you may build something that later on you're going to have to refactor. So the goal is to do as much as you can with Drupal before writing any custom code. There's a new module. Historically, there was a module called Rules, which is really popular in Drupal 7. Now we have the ECA module, which basically lets you, it does entity condition action. So this is a module for contribution that lets you do a lot of things that a lot of sites need. And it's already been built. It's already, they have a great UI. So that's another example of a Drupal module that can help you build your site without writing any custom code. Because it's already, all you have to do is add the ECA module to your code base, and now you have all this extra functionality that's going to let you build your sites without. So the goal here is to talk about what you can do before you write custom code. So you want to reuse what other people have done and tried and true. And the other thing is, the last thing I wanted to talk about here is every part of your site, you want it to be statically cacheable. That usually means using GET requests instead of post or options requests. Because GET requests can be cached in Cloudflare, GET requests can be cached in your balancer statically. Post requests, like filling out forms, not showing the form, but once they hit a submit button, a post request will go directly to the web. It'll pass through all of the static caching and hit your web servers. Or if you're using option requests, like say you're using Node.js or some other kind of JavaScript decoupled framework, a lot of them tend to use post and options requests when they should be using GET requests whenever possible. Are there any questions here that you guys have about? I mean, I just kind of give you some kind of guidelines. Obviously, everyone's going to have their own modules that they like to use for whatever they're trying to build. But these are baseline things that every site should consider using.
100% statically cacheable. That's a very lofty, like, you know, like, that would be nice, but
yeah,
I mean, like a lot of sites, that's just not realistic.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like there's one site I work on. Now, granted, it's a relatively small site, but most of the like there's a fair amount of traffic that comes in from external users, you know, and users, but then that all that's cacheable because that's like just CSS and graphics and
Right.
and the actual like the stuff of the site.
Yes.
But we also have like an internal section of the site, and that's for the employees who are kind of using it as an intranet, and where I built in a lot of automation for a lot of their paperwork. For I don't want to get into too much detail about the content, but a lot of the people that work there, they need to fill out forms and run transactions, and for our customers coming in, so all that is that's the meat and potatoes of actually what's
the value of
what's actually taking up a lot of the traffic. Is like there's what the external users is kind of like inconsequential. Like it's actually more of like an intranet site, and so it's all I'm using Drupal more as like an application server.
Yeah.
So like I would love to see that, but I get like 30% at most.
No, because this applies more to anonymous traffic.
Right.
When you have authenticated users, each user gets its own URL, gets its own. So now you're going to be hitting your web. So, but that's part of the business. There are if you build a social media site, if you build anything like that, if you have logged in users, you can't cache. You can only cache the parts of the site that are not changing.
Right.
And that every user gets the same URL. But there's an example of sometimes people run marketing campaigns. And instead of sending one URL for all the users, they use individual URLs for every user, so they can track what users are, and then that's going to hit your backend.
That's really granular.
Yeah, but I'm just giving you an example of if your business requires you to use this, then you're going to have to. But ideally, you want to cache as much as you can. If there's any content that's shared across all users, you want to make that statically cacheable.
Sure.
But if you haven't logged in users and they have unique URLs, that's always going to hit your web. So you're right. That's It depends on what
That's very idealistic.
No, it is, yeah. I agree with you 100%. Okay, here's some kind of Drupal-isms of how to improve performance. The first thing you should always do is, by default, Drupal has a dblog module enabled. On production, you want to disable that module and use the syslog module instead. dblog module writes all of the logs to your database.
Watchdog.
Which, yeah, Watchdog is one of them, Drupal requests. Which means that anytime you're basically your log files invoking the web's bootstrapping Drupal all the time. Syslog puts the logs in a file, so that way you're not bootstrapping Drupal, and it's a lot more efficient. So the reason why we use dblog is we like to go to the page under status to see what are the logs. You won't get that with the syslog module, but most hosting providers will offer you your logs if you use syslog instead of dblog.
Yeah,
So that's
you have to dig for it though. You have to dig for it though. Yeah, you have to dig to the server to you have to get to the where the slugs live, and you have to track them and tail them, and it's all paying them. It's so much easier to rewatch dog.
No, the syslog will record Watchdog. It records them all. It just won't put them in the database. It puts them in a file.
I know, but it's a lot easier to read it all alone. I'm just.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, that's why it's enabled by default because most people wouldn't know how to look at their logs if they didn't have it. But this is something that you should consider doing if you have dblog enabled on production. Look at strategies to move it to syslog and disable dblog because it does consume a lot of resources. This is something that I'm a fan of, not reusing field names. I like to create unique, whenever you create a content type, I like to create unique field values that are not shared across content types. It has to do with when you create a view, if you have a field that's a lot of, you can't tell what content type is coming from without it. So it's much better, I think, to not reuse. If you have a field like image across content types, you want to have a different field name for each one of those. So when you build your views, you can actually see. You can only bring back the data of the fields you really want. So, and one thing I like to do, which is something that Jay Epstein taught me, co-founder of Drupal, he likes to put in every field name an acronym in front of the field name so that you know when you look at the database, you can see what every field, what belongs to what content type. I think it's better for building views. I think it's a great way to do it.
How does that help with performance?
Well, it's when you build a view that you're going to get the performance, because if you build a view and you have to bring back the data for all the fields across different content types to then sort, you're bringing back more data from the database, which means it's going to be slower and it's going to consume more resources. So if you're building a view and you only want to bring back certain fields from certain content types, when you go look at your view, you'll actually see in the field name, you'll know what content type it belongs to. So you'll bring back less data and your query will be faster.
Because your tables will be smaller.
Yes. Yes, each of these, yeah, exactly. You're going to have more tables for fields, but when you're pulling that data back, you're only going to bring back the data you really need, not extra that you have to sort through. So this is a technique that's, I think it was even highlighted in Drupalize.me at one time. The other thing, this is really important, the PHP memory limit. This is a limit on the web server. Now, it's not as important if you have an auto-scaling backend, but if you have fixed hardware, that means this PHP memory limit is the amount of memory you give to every time the web server has to respond to a request. So if you set this limit really high, that means you have fewer procs available on the web server to respond to requests. So you're actually minimizing the performance of that web server. But then again, if you make this too low, then you can have PHP timeouts. So what you do is use conditional memory to only give the pages. There's a way to use conditional PHP memory to only give more memory to the processes that need it, and then the overall, like every other request, defaults to a lower memory consumption.
I think it's interesting that like ideally, like as low as possible, ideally 128 megs. Well, isn't like the default for PHP like it's like 32 or something like that, but by default on PHP, or even less.
I mean, if you get it even lower, that's better. But this is kind of the standard for most.
Oh, I've had issues where like, okay, I use Nginx for my web servers, and Nginx, for uploading files.
Oh, okay.
Defaults to 1 meg.
Right. But then
It was like,
you can use conditional memory just to give that process more memory, but then set the overall PHP memory limit for everything else to lower memory.
It was just an anecdote. I had to it took me weeks to figure out that why I had it set in my PHP INI for to be able to upload 50 meg file. One of my clients uploads large files which is another story, but but I was like, why is it not allowing her to upload those files? And anything larger than 1 meg wouldn't work at all.
Because that was the overall PHP memory limit.
No. It was actually Nginx, really.
Oh, this is more like for Apache. Yeah. Okay. Let's see.
The revisions.
Yeah, revisions only by default they're on for a lot of things, like for nodes, node revisions and paragraph revisions. If you don't need them, try not to use them, but if you need revisions, try to limit, because if you don't, you can run out of space. So I just kind of give an example of how to build a site. Sample domain, put in Cloudflare, then you register your domain, you point your domain to the name servers of Cloudflare, and then you add some A records, and then I built a Drupal 10 site, Umami, and this is the example I wanted to show you. So here, all this data here is coming from the Apache access log. This is all requests that are getting through. This is just a Drupal 10.3 site with Umami on it, with no other restrictions in Cloudflare or anything. So as you can see, this is over a 24-hour period, the number of requests I'm getting, just to give you an example of what's getting through to the web servers. So here we have, pulled from the Apache access log, you can actually see what URLs are being hit. These are all getting past all the static caching, and these are being responded to by the web server. So that's what I was saying before. It's good to know what's getting through what's hitting your web, so that you can decide, is there a way I can cache this? If I can't, then that's part of my business case, and I have to keep using it. And I generated these graphs with a tool called Drupal, which stands for Drupal Scrutiny. So here's another 404s. You want to keep that down to as little. As you can see, I didn't do any blocking, but they're getting 404s because they're trying to look for a WordPress site. So they're scanning your site. So what you want to do in Cloudflare in the WAF is block these paths for WordPress, WP admin. See, you just block that in Cloudflare, it would never hit your webs. And then here's this is really important. I want to spend a little time on this because this shows you over a 24-hour period. You can see these spikes. This orange is this IP address here. So that would be potentially something I'd want to block because it's doing a lot of requests. So this is a site that just has generic content. This is how you would look at your Apache access log, see what's getting through, and then decide whether you want to block it or not. So this is an active strategy to keep bad actors from accessing your site, and also to keep them from potential, because sometimes these spikes can be so big that take down your site. So you want to be able to actively, periodically make sure that certain only valid traffic is getting through to your webs. And here's a little more about how much, this is not much memory consumption, but this gives you the top 10 paths and how many times it was. See, every hour some bot was hitting the site. So you want to block that IP that's you doing that. I just give you some examples on how to. Okay, to finish off application efficiency, what's the biggest cost of downtime for most customers?
Well, for us is
Editing on prod.
Yeah, well, custom code tends to, it's not it's usually, it could be a bot or something, but if you have custom code that's very slow, if any bot attacks that URL, you could potentially take your site down. So, we all have to sometimes use custom code, but just hopefully it's efficient and it won't have cause downtime for you. So let me get through. I have 4 customer examples of scenario. A new site, they had a JS front end launched with post requests to the Drupal backend. All of the requests to the backend were post requests. This caused downtime. As soon as they launched their site, they went down. How do you think we fixed it?
Make get requests.
We changed the post request to get request, and the site was able to run without going down. Another example, a chip company. They're using the paragraph revisions without any limits. Over time, the site went down because of that. Their database got so huge, and the response time for certain pages just overwhelmed the back end. How do we fix that? We had to truncate a lot of tables that had a lot of data that wasn't really needed because it was so old. And then the customer added a limit of number of revisions to keep so that we didn't keep growing that database. An insurance company on their homepage, this is a portal for their agents, which meant every time an agent went to the site, they would have to log in because it was just a portal for their insurance agents. On the homepage, whenever you loaded the homepage, it would trigger a login just from loading the homepage. That took their site down. How do we fix it? We removed the automatic login registration on every homepage. They added a block where the user had to click on login. So it was actively, the homepage was cached, but if the user wanted to log in, they'd have to click the login. It wasn't done automatically for every request. And that was able to fix the problem.
Great.
Yeah. An energy company with residential customers, like kind of it's not FP&L, but it's kind of like FP&L. They're making a lot of third-party calls to get data from a third-party source, and the third-party source, their site went down. So then, Drupal was the PHP time to call the third-party API was using the default, so it was taking forever. And if the site wasn't there, it was consuming PHP resources on the Drupal site, and this caused downtime when they had a lot of traffic. How do we fix that? We added PHP timeouts to the request, and to monitor if the third party was down, to send back maybe a cache value or not wait for it to time out. Shorten the timeout. That way we weren't sitting there waiting. So it was just a way to tweak the custom code and also they reduced the number of external calls. So they were just, every time they needed the information, they were going and getting it. They decided to cache part of that response for some time on the Drupal side so that they weren't as many external calls, which then freed up resources. I think if there's anything you can take away today, it's that bootstrapping Drupal is expensive, not just money-wise, but uptime, could impact your uptime, could impact your SEO. So keep that in mind when you're building your Drupal sites. Here's links to Cloudflare. You get a free account there. New Relic is also a great tool to use to kind of figure out what's going on in your back end. I use Ager and Boa to build my stack. It's one option you could use. I have a presentation from
You Gucci 12.
yeah, an old presentation that still applies today. One way of it's basically you run a script on a clean VPS and it sets up Ager on it, and then that way you can launch Drupal sites.
That's mine. Like the new one that came out?
Yeah, the new one.
On 22? That's mine.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, I did a lot of work with lots of guys in Canada on that.
Forget his name.
Dan. Oh God.
So that's one solution. And there's a lot of other ways to. I think there's Drupal Forge. There's a lot of ways to spin up sites, but this is one I've used in the past. Here's a link to Scrutiny, which is a tool I use to generate the graphs I was showing you. Here's links to my sandbox modules. And here's, for the sandbox modules I presented at Drupal Camp Atlanta in 2015. The presentation is on the Drupal TV if you want to see what I did and explain how it worked. And just the last slide, we're running out of time. We have our next Brown Drupal meetup on March 12th. It's remote. It's posted on GDO, groups.drupal.org. We have a link there. You can join remotely if you like, and I can answer further questions if you want. And then you could also follow Broward Drupal on social media. And down here is my Twitter and my X and my Blue Sky handles on every slide. Any questions? Yes.
Sorry, I have a question. It may take a little bit, so I don't want to take any.
Go ahead. Yeah, if anyone has to leave, they can.
Okay. So we have some downtime, and most of it is due to AI and everything. There's so many people harvesting
the bots.
The bots are crazy. We run a repository, institutional repository for FSU, and it's like hundreds of thousands of images, thesis, dissertations, and it's the type of stuff that they want, right? So we want the thing to be open and to be available, but it gets crawled daily by so many different bots all over the world.
Yeah.
And the problem is that they're coming up with such sophisticated ways of it's many different IP addresses coming from different parts of the world. Like it's no longer like
it's all hitting your backend. Yeah, it's not being cached. It's hitting your backend all the time. Yeah.
Right. So have you found any good ways to get it to?
You can use rate limiting in Cloudflare or Akamai to basically identify whenever a lot of requests are coming in, they throttle that IP or group of IPs so that it's not hitting you as hard.
Okay.
I mean, ideally, if there's certain like AI agents, they usually identify themselves by user agent. Right. Like Claude identifies itself. For example, there's a Cloud bot. So you can throttle or block. There's different. This is where the WAF. You have to. If you don't have a WAF, you should definitely get.
We're using Fastly.
Okay, and Fastly, you go into the dashboard, whatever you have set up. See if you can either. If you want that traffic to hit your site, because you want them to scan your site so that it's in their AI model, I would try to see if they have a solution called rate limiting. Because then what you could do is by automatically rate limiting will, when the rate limiting is turned on, when it sees a lot of requests coming from one IP, it can say, well, if you hit this threshold, you're not going to get challenged on every request. So that'll slow that request down. It won't block it, but it'll it'll throttle it down. So look into rate limiting from Fastly.
Yeah, we've looked into that. It's just they a lot of them don't respect the things that you're trying to tell them. Like someone we say don't crawl or whatever, but they don't respect that, especially bad agents, right? Like, there's a lot of companies that do tell you, but most of them don't, right? Because they still want the content. And if you try to block it, there's even companies now that sell ways to get around that, where they'll be like, oh, we have IP addresses all over the world, and they'll sort of adjust to make sure that it doesn't seem like it's all coming from one place. I don't know if you've seen this. But it's very difficult to block these agents because they're making sure that it doesn't look like what they're doing.
Then you should look at, because a lot of the bad actors that don't say who they are, if the user agent field is blank, that usually means it's a bad actor. So you could probably block those maybe in I don't know the Fastly configuration well, but if there's no user agent, that's suspicious.
Okay.
So you may want to consider blocking anything that does not identify, because if a person's going to your site, the user agent will be a Chrome user agent or Mozilla or a Windows type user agent. If you have a blank user agent, I would try to see if you can either throttle that, like just automatically figure out a way to throttle those things, and talk to Fastly and see what options they give you to either block that or throttle it, or that's where I would start. If anything with a blank user agent is suspect, because most valid requests, like from Google that's indexing your site, they identify themselves as a Google user agent. So you want that to go through because you want your site to be indexed. Or if the cloud bot, you want your cloud to index your site to have that content. So when people do a search in Claude, they get back your web, then you want to let that through. But there's different ways of, I would look at the user agent and talk to Fastly about how to, because you may have to pay a different level of plan to turn on, that's usually a paid service.
Yeah,
it's not there as a, I think Cloudflare has a few free, like you may have like 4 or 5 free ones, but if you want more, then you have to pay up. But I don't know how Fastly is structured, so I would look at that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think they do have a separate layer, but it's a lot more money too.
Yeah, that's probably what you need to look into.
But also, most of your visitors will be anonymous, so I think also what you told is if you make it cacheable, also the assets, the fonts, the images, everything like that.
Yeah, but these bots tend to scan across they scan your whole site. They even use 404s, and that's just going to bypass all the caching. That's why it's a problem, because the URLs they're hitting is not a cache URL. It's a URL that hasn't been cached, because they just put in any URL / 3457689. That's going to cache bust your Cloudflare. Your static caching is going to hit your web. And if they're using different numbers all the time, then that's going to break. Static caching won't catch that.
The WP admin.
So the only thing you could do is to try to stop them at the WAF level and look at techniques. And I mean, you're going to end up saving money, because if whatever money you're saving and not getting that traffic to your backend, that's money you're not paying wherever you're hosting. So you're saving. It may be worth it. You may have to do a cost analysis on spending more on Cloudflare or Acquia or Fastly. It may be worth it, because there's more and more bots out there scanning all kinds of things these days.
My server, I've got a server that I'm playing with that I'm getting overrun by my MySQL bin logs. And I fixed it at one point, but then I had to I use cloud server, so I had to strip that down and I had to rebuild it. And I forgot what I did to fix it. And it's like every couple of days I have to go and just delete a bunch of crap. Cause it's filling up my server.
Do you need those logs?
No.
You can disable it.
Have you
Do
tried this?
you have file per table enabled? INNODB file per table.
I don't think so.
So right now your MySQL database is all in one file, and the big log is used to. Are you doing any sort of replicate? Then you probably don't even need the bin log. And if you switch over the file per table, you get a performance boost as well, so that each table in the database is a file in the file system as well. INNODB file per table. Yeah. And you can change the bin log properties where you only really need the bin log depending on the how compliant of a transactional level you need to be, like if you're trying to replicate it or something like that. If you don't need any of that, you can almost turn the bin log off.
No, what's on that server is large lists of shit. It's nothing important.
Okay, and that's it then. Thank you. If you want, this is where you can reach me. I tweeted out the slides. They're on X. If you want the slides, you can just go to that URL. Got email there. My Twitter handle, Blue Sky handle. So thank you.